and learn. My name is John Freeze, and I am trying to find the button for whatever more I just put up on the screen. Sorry about that. My name is John Freeze, and I'm the director of the Center for Professional Education here at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. So happy to have you all with us today. This series is a partnership between UTC, Center for Professional Education, and the Chattanooga Regional Manufacturers Association. We greatly appreciate the continued partnership between us and that organization. And I know Megan's name was on the list, but I don't see her on the call yet, but we always appreciate Megan King and her support of what we do. And again, thanks to all of you for joining us on a truly beautiful Friday afternoon. I think they call these a Chamber of Commerce Day, so I appreciate that. And with the number of folks that have not turned on their cameras, I can just assume that many of you are at the golf course tuning in. Anyway, before I turn it over to Enrique to introduce our speaker for the afternoon, I do want to give a special shout out to the University of Arkansas and the Sam M. Walton College of Business. We really appreciate their support of our effort. Enrique, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, John. Appreciate all you all joining us this beautiful day. I'll quickly introduce Dr. Stephanie Thomas, and we'll get to the subject. Before I do, though, let me remind you, we want these sessions to be interactive. So as you go, please type in the questions in your chat box, and we'll try to blend in the questions into our conversation. So don't be waiting till the end. Feed those questions as we go through our conversation here. So, but Dr. Stephanie Thomas, she's an associate professor at the University of Arkansas in the field of supply chain management under the Sam Walton College of Business. And she acquired her MBA at University of Tennessee.
Go Vols.
And her PhD at Go Vols, and PhD in supply chain management at Georgia Southern. And Dr. Thomas has really a combination of really strong academic credential, as well as having worked in industry at Lowe's, IBM, and Stanley Tools. So it's always good to get that combination of perspective of the academia with the practice out in the field. So as you signed up, and our topic with regards to very to the heart of many in the transportation industry in regards to the issue of pay, and that pay is not enough, which is the core of our subject today, amidst the well-known ongoing driver shortage, pays many companies that have utilized signing bonuses and all sorts of pay-related tactics. And 2 weeks after Walmart announced that their driver pay is moving from $88,000 to $95,000 to $110,000 for drivers. Some of these, and by the way, they're advertising that, if you haven't read it, starting driver pay in those kinds of ranges. The topic of pay is not enough is very appropriate, as many are thinking, well, I can't afford to pay my drivers $110,000 a year. So very timely, very appropriate. Dr. Thomas, thank you for being with us. So how did you get into this topic of, driver shortage, pay is not enough?
So I'm very interested. Thank you, John and Enrique, for inviting me. I'm super excited to be here. I'm a Tennessean at heart, so I always like to get back and connect with people in the volunteer state. So when I was actually working on my doctoral degree, one of the things you do in a PhD program is you read a whole lot, and it's not always the most exciting stuff. And then you're trying to figure out ideas for research, and well aware of the high levels of truck driver turnover, and a lot of the research that had already been done had kind of done the easy stuff, like pay drivers more or keep them at home more, and found that really didn't eliminate the problems. And this is a complex issue, so there is no one magic wand answer. What I'm going to offer is just from some research that I've done, some different things to consider. And that's where we kind of, some colleagues and and I started thinking about kind of the psychological side of being a truck driver, because it's a little bit different job than what a lot of us do on a daily basis, and that leads to some different potential challenges. And so it was kind of from this core of here's a problem, truck driver turnover. Nobody's kind of figured out the easy way to attack this. What else could there possibly be? And that kind of laid the foundation for several different research projects.
You know, I think in industry and employers, as we look at how do we attract employees, we're always looking at that aspect of how can we attract, how we can present our companies and as a great place to work. And, you know, but drivers obviously present some very interesting challenges in regard to how you apply that concept of attracting and then, of course, retaining, not only attracting, but retaining the talent. So as you started looking into some of those other factors, I mean, how did you approach it? How did you start getting some of your information? What started coming out?
Sure. So the first project that I did with some colleagues, it was a qualitative study, and we interviewed truck drivers and just said, kind of started with, tell us about your job. And so it started as simple as that. And, you know, when you stop truck drivers at a truck stop sometimes, and they're not kind of under a corporate umbrella or anything like that, they're very open and they have very strong feelings about their job and how they feel and stuff. And so then my colleagues and I, after doing a bunch of these interviews, kind of came together and said, okay, what are some of the common things that came out as being stressors that drivers are feeling? And so some of the things that kind of were the big key findings from that were, and some of these are probably not overly earth shattering, but it's kind of taking them together, and one being loneliness and the impact on family life. And so, you know, especially for drivers that are away from home several nights a week, and that can cause problems with the family and all of that. The personal side influences their job. One of the things that we hadn't really considered until these interviews are health related issues. And there's kind of two parts of that. One is health related issues, because in a lot of cases, you're leading a very sedentary, lonely lifestyle. Often you may have, there's been research done on drivers being more susceptible to the influence of drugs, alcohol, caffeine, things like that. So you have, and then just have maybe eating fast food and not being making healthy choices, that you have a variety of health related issues related to that. The other one that came out that we hadn't really thought about is, if you have an issue, if you get sick, if you have an accident or something and you're on the road, not knowing where to go for health related assistance. And that was kind of one of those things of, you know, I know if I feel bad, I call my doctor, you know, whatever. But if you're traveling and you're not always in the same place or visiting the same places, you may not have an awareness of where to seek help, and not feeling like they have support related to that. Lack of respect. And in terms of respect, that's respect from other vehicles on the road. That's respect from colleagues within their organizations. A lot of times that was specifically put at dispatchers, because that was who a lot of times that they have the strongest connection to. And then the perception that for the work that they do, that they aren't compensated well. And then the final thing that was kind of the big stressors that came out of this was government regulations. And so a lot of this data was collected before the ELD mandate went into effect. And so there was a lot of concerns with what that was going to do to it. And that kind of was the initial kind of focus. And through that, we kind of figured out these 4 big buckets lead to kind of some personal stress and job stress, and the increases in stress lead to people considering leaving, whether it's their company or the industry entirely. And I think many of you may know that, you know, drivers notoriously will industry hop sometimes as well. So how do we take away some of these things that might contribute to them doing that? And as this study kind of wrapped up, it started planting a seed for a concept that I'd read about in terms of job burnout. And that kind of led the foundation for a follow-on study, which was a survey. And job burnout, if you're not familiar with it, is just basically a psychological syndrome that is an outcome of response to chronic stress, or in different types of chronic stress. And when you look at the 3 different parts of job burnout, one is exhaustion, and that's physical and emotional exhaustion. And for job burnout, we're talking about exhaustion from your job, not necessarily the people that you work with. So it's the job, it's the work itself. The second part of job burnout is cynicism. And it's just, we all kind of need to know what cynicism is, again, related to the job, not necessarily the people of the job. And then the last one are feelings of professional inefficacy. And this is, I'm not feeling that I'm effective at my job, that I'm being able to contribute, that I'm a valued part of the organization. And so from that first study, we hopped over into a survey where we looked at job burnout. Initially, when job burnout was first kind of developed by people named Maslach and some of his colleagues, it was looked at in situations where there's high touch situations, like salespersons, customer service reps, like nurses and doctors, and so people that are constantly around people all the time, and thinking that connection to people, that constant connection to people, led to burnout. Well, my colleagues and I were looking at drivers going, they're a little bit different situation because they don't always have those connections to people. And so it was kind of like, when you're in a different type of context, how does job burnout kind of manifest itself for truck drivers? And knowing how that kind of emerges, how could companies potentially help manage it with their drivers?
Yeah, I could, that aspect of exhaustion, when you look at that component of burnout and you think of drivers that get stress, emotional, physical stress from multiple dimensions. You're out on the road, you got drivers around, everybody's going, if you drive through Atlanta and you're in a truck, I feel sorry for those drivers that have just passenger cars going around them.
Right.
And it's just absolutely crazy. And then, that aspect that, drivers are the face of companies. They're coming in contact with at times, many customers, and it's really critical. They're not trained and educated for that aspect. And, that's another component of stress.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, really can see that. And we don't necessarily normally think of those components of what you're describing, really that kind of a job burnout. Yeah.
Well, Enrique, it was interesting because a lot of times with some of those other job situations, like I was talking about, exhaustion is the big thing. And a lot of research just tries to say burnout is exhaustion. And what we found is drivers were kind of okay being exhausted. They realized they're going to work some hours. That's just part of the job. They were even okay being cynical. That was kind of okay with them. That feeling of not being effective at the job that I do, that was the thing that really kind of led them to consider leaving organizations.
And I think you mentioned is that somewhat connected to the aspect of respect?
Yes.
Yeah. And what are some of the dimensions you found that, within the feedback of how is it that when drivers are on the field, what are some of the components of not feeling like they're being respected?
Well, even you mentioned like cars cutting them off driving through Atlanta or DFW or any other big city. It's that if you understood my value and what I'm bringing and how I'm getting your Amazon package to your door, you wouldn't cut me off across 5 lanes of traffic when you know what I've got there. So there's this idea of that the cars, the vehicles around them don't have respect. With some of the interviews, they would talk about, I will show up to have my trailer unloaded, and I'm not even given the courtesy to be able to use a restroom at that location. And well, okay, that makes you feel really crappy if you're not even being told that you even are worthwhile to visit the bathroom. That goes a long way to making you not feel very good about how people are viewing you and that you aren't even able to do your job. Pre ELD, I had some people talk about, I used to stop and go shower and get a meal before I would go to a customer to unload my truck, because I felt more presentable. Well, now once I'm on the clock with the ELD mandate, I don't have time to go stop and take a shower and look more presentable. And so I'm not feeling like I'm putting my best foot forward. So even there's, regulations that are in play for safety and for a lot of other reasons, but yet they cause some ripple effects that go into some of these feelings that can lead to the job burnout feelings.
Yeah. And by the way, really for our audience here, as we go through this, not only questions, but do you want to share some thoughts about the kinds of things that you have done to address and deal with these kinds of issues? Please feel free to share. I mean, I know here at Chattanooga Baker, as you talk about some of those things, for our drivers, I know we keep a stack of moon pies cartons that as drivers come in, we're always offering drivers. Of course, we may not be maybe contributing to their most healthy habits in regards to eating habits, but I know we're always really trying to share those with them, ask them, and see if they're interested in how we can help them. We realize that they're a very important part of the supply chain. So, what, Dr. Thomas, so what are maybe some of the other thoughts around aspects of, okay, so how do we deal with this? What can we do?
So, I know a lot of companies are trying a lot of different things, and it's, doing driver recognition, having celebrations if you have, 1 million accident-free miles or safe miles or stuff like that to help with some of those feelings. Some of the stuff that leads into some of that stress, and without getting too nitty-gritty into some of the research, the hardcore research stuff that nobody wants to read, is there's this idea of role conflict and role ambiguity. And as a driver, you have a company. If you're working for an organization, you could be, have your own truck. But if you're working for a company, you work for them, but yet you're also trying to meet the demands of the organizations that you are taking loads to or picking loads up from. And so those boundaries of who you are accountable can kind of blur, and your organization might tell you to do one thing and you arrive to pick up a shipment and they might have completely different rules or tell you to do something else. And then, or they may eat into your time that you need to do something that your company is making you or is planning on you doing. So then you have this conflict, and then that makes you feel really stressed when you're like, how am I supposed to make everybody happy? Or in some cases it's, hey, go do your job, but really not giving you enough information to know what you're supposed to be doing, what's the right way to do it. That's where that role ambiguity comes into play. So there's this idea of training, making sure that the people that are in a company like dispatchers or others that have connections with drivers, that you can help them be supportive for drivers, to hear them when they call in with a problem and stuff. And maybe you can't make everything perfect, but empathy can go a long way. I've heard of some organizations taking, say, dispatchers or new employees and have them doing ride-alongs with drivers so that they have a better understanding of what that whole process looks like and what people are doing. And so that they can bring that back. And one, that'll help them in how they deal with the drivers, but two, they can tell other people, as well. I know on my side, I'm trying to educate the students that come into my classroom about some of these things of, hey, when you're driving down the road, don't cut the big trucks off. We need them, and to just plant seeds of understanding and respect. And yes, that's not going to cover everything all at once, but I think there's some stuff that we as individuals and consumers can realize that we're continuing to put stress on drivers by wanting shipments faster. We want, things done instantaneously, and realizing that transportation is what makes that happen. And most of that transportation is coming through our truck drivers to enable that. And the more we're stressing that system, the more challenges that they're going to be. And so as consumers, can we make decisions that can help eliminate some of that of, hey, you know what, it's okay if my package doesn't show up quite as quick.
Yeah.
If it makes more sense and takes some, if that driver can spend the night at home instead of having to be out on the road.
Yeah. And a comment before we get to a question that just came in. The other part that you know, because a lot of what you described is communication and connectivity, that there's a lot of technology nowadays that really enables companies, providers of services to support services for employees that really enable, again, the aspect of maintaining the connection with the employees, with the drivers, as well as being able to share the information so that they feel that they have information at their fingertips instead of having to call some service center in relation to some kind of health related, to the example you gave, and having to wait on the phone for 10 minutes for somebody to give some guidance in regards to, okay, what do I do when I get sick, when I'm 4 states away from my home state?
Right.
So I think technology it really also helps deal with some of these problems. So question came in, Dr. Thomas, on drivers' concerns and what is all this talking about driverless trucks? Is that played some role? Any feedback, any input in regards to, is that affecting the dynamics of drivers and driver stress and driver burnout and in the environment? Have you detected any of that?
That's a great question. When we were first doing data collection and stuff, there were some kind of concerns, but this was a few years ago. This was pre-COVID. So the conversation hasn't gotten as far as it has been now. I think there is this, for those that aren't as well informed, there is some sense of, am I even going to be needed anymore? Those that are pretty well in tune with the industry know that, one, driverless trucks, if and when they get here, are not going to just magically overnight, woo, no longer do we have a shortage issue. There's going to be, at least with the technologies now, it's not appropriate in every situation. And so, and the system still needs to be set up to accommodate driverless trucks too. How are we going to get, fuel vehicles and stuff if there isn't a driver in there and stuff like that? Technology is going to continue to shape and change the industry. From talking to some of the companies locally that are, they're like, we have ordered driverless trucks and we've been waiting for 5 years to get them. So I don't think we're going to see, a massive change in the industry anytime soon. But I think that's leading companies to also go, okay, beyond the turnover issues and trying to retain drivers, it's where do we find new drivers? And there's been some look at, it's from some of the numbers that I've seen, anywhere between like 90 to 97% of drivers are male. Well, there's an opportunity to tap in and try to find, more female drivers. Some research has said that, they tend to be safer drivers or have, less issues of, as we continue to need more drivers, we need to hold on to the ones that we have. And we can do that with some of this communication and some of the things that we kind of talked about to help lower burnout. But it's also, we've got to entice more drivers as the driver population. Average age is getting a lot older. There's going to be a huge exodus in terms of retirement, and we don't have that same influx. And that pulls in the other question of lowering the driving age. I know there's a lot of thoughts, around putting an 18-wheeler behind, a big piece of machinery like that. But I think companies are continuing to try, but I think it's part of a lot of this is there isn't one easy response. And it's going to be like, you have to treat drivers like a lot of other employees. You're going to have to spend some time staying in touch with them, getting to know them, make sure they, even though they're on the road and out of sight, a lot of times, make sure that they feel connected to the organization, that they feel like they have the tools to do their job and do it well. And then that will hopefully help them want to stay around for longer periods of time.
As you open the aspect of demographics, the change in demographics, as you've stated, very much a traditionally very male-dominated job segment, inevitably changing not only from a standpoint of male-female, but also the millennial. A lot of the aspects you mentioned in regards to cultural things are culturally valued by employees.
Mhm.
The millennial generation and forward are a lot more sensitive
Mhm.
and place a lot more importance in those aspects than traditional generations. So really what I read in between those lines, and not necessarily coming up through your research and that aspect, is this is not going to get any easier. If anything, it's going to get even harder. So some of the thoughts you've shared in relation to the kinds of solutions, we better work on them because it's going to become even more important.
In that, quite honestly, that's a driver issue, but that's just an issue in supply chain across the board. In talent is how to attract and retain. And beyond just drivers, we've got needs all over our businesses, and the companies that crack that nut are going to be the ones that are successful in the long run.
Yeah, and by the way, we've got a handful of minutes left. I know time is flying by quickly. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box so that we can take them into consideration and part of our conversation here in the final minutes. But I know you're absolutely right. The companies I've worked for, we've tried to make culture to be an important aspect and differentiator, not only from a recruiting aspect, but then also the aspect of retention. Mm-hmm. And, it's when you mentioned earlier about appreciation, that is just so important. And it requires a time, while it has to be thoughtful and you have to keep it in mind, is such a simple, free actions that you can take to help build that culture and retain your employees. And I stress the aspect, as I know many in our audience know, many dimensions of appreciation are absolutely free, which very much ties in with the topic that you started. Pay is not enough and money's not enough, and we have to be thinking creatively in other dimensions. Absolutely.
Well, and I think any of us it surprises me sometimes when I'll have a former student that I run into years later, and they'll be like, you sent me an email one time and you encouraged me, for something. And if you hadn't done that, I wouldn't be here today or whatever. So an email, a word in a conversation and stuff can, while it doesn't seem like a big deal, can be the game changer for everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I don't see any more questions. Appreciate Dr. Thomas. Thank you very much for sharing some of the insights from your research. Very appropriate, very timely. Thanks, audience. John, back to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Enrique. Thank you, Stephanie. We appreciate you spending a little time with us this afternoon. For the rest of you, thank you all so much for continuing to support our effort. Looking ahead to next month, we are going to be taking a look at a transportation management system called Cargo Steam and how it is being used in industry to give greater visibility across the supply chain. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, go have a wonderful afternoon on this beautiful Friday. Thanks everyone.
Absolutely. Have a great day.